A security guard walks up to Keanu Reeves in the lobby of a restaurant Keanu Reeves owns and tells him he cannot come in. Not because he caused trouble, not because he had a reservation somewhere else, because he looked like he might. Faded cargo jacket, worn jeans, canvas sneakers with the left sole coming loose at the toe. The guard was 23 years old and very confident, and the man standing in front of him looked nothing like a billionaire. He looked like someone who had been on a long drive and could use a cup of coffee. He looked like somebody's uncle. He looked, to put it plainly, like someone who did not belong in a place like this. So the guard put his hand out, flat and professional, and said the restaurant had a capacity issue tonight and suggested he try somewhere down the street. Keanu thanked him, said he understood, nodded once, slowly, the way people do when something has surprised them and they are still deciding what to do with it. Then he pulled out his phone and made one call. He stood just outside the lobby door, his back turned slightly, and spoke for less than 90 seconds. When he finished, he sat down on a concrete planter near the valet stand and waited. He did not look angry. He did not look impatient. He looked like a man who had sat in harder places than a planter outside a restaurant and was perfectly comfortable waiting to see what happened next. 11 minutes later, something happened that left the front-of-house staff of Callaway's in Grant Park, Chicago, in a silence so complete you could hear the ice machine from 20 feet away. This is that story. There is a restaurant in Grant Park, Chicago, called Callaway's. It sits on the ground floor of a converted limestone building on South Michigan Avenue, directly across from the museum campus, with floor-to-ceiling windows that face the lake. At sunset on a clear evening, the light comes through those windows in long copper angles and settles across tables draped in cream linen, so stiff and smooth, it looks almost architectural. The dining room holds 42 seats and is almost never full, because the kind of people who eat at Callaway's tend to prefer it that way. Dinner for 2 runs to $480 before wine. The menu changes weekly. There is no printed description of the dishes. A server explains each one, slowly, and you are expected to ask questions and remember the answers. The sommelier has been working there for 11 years. She knows the name of every regular and keeps a private file on their preferences, allergies, and conversational topics so that no guest ever has to explain themselves twice. Callaway's is the kind of place where the experience of being there is itself the point, and where that experience depends entirely on the careful management of who, exactly, is allowed to be part of it. The man in charge of that management, on the night in question, was not Callaway's general manager. He was its head of security and front-of-house operations, a title that had been created specifically for him 18 months earlier, and his name was Derek Payne. Derek was 23 years old, 5 feet 11, and wore his uniform with a precision that suggested the uniform was not just clothing, but evidence. He stood near the lobby entrance during the dinner service, with his hands clasped behind his back and his chin elevated at an angle that communicated, without words, that he had been placed here to ensure that Callaway's remained exactly what it was, and that he took this responsibility seriously. He was, by every visible measure, very good at his job. The man whose car had just pulled into the valet lane was a regular. He arrived a few times a year, always without a reservation, always in ordinary clothes, and the standing instruction from management was simple. Seat him immediately, at his preferred table by the northeast window, and do not make a fuss. He did not like a fuss. The staff had been told this when they were hired, but Derek had not been told. Not specifically. You need to understand something about Marcus Payne before you understand what he did that night. Not Derek Payne, his older brother, the man who got Derek the job at Callaway's and had coached him, carefully and consistently. In and how to hold himself in a room that expected a certain kind of bearing from the people who worked inside it. Marcus was 41 years old. He ran his own private security firm, Payne Stanton Group, out of a suite of offices on West Monroe Street, with 17 full-time employees and contracts with 4 of the 6 most expensive hotels in the city. He drove a dark gray Escalade, wore his suits custom, and owned a home in Kenilworth with a kitchen bigger than the apartment he grew up in on the south side of Roseland. He had come a very long way from Roseland, and he had done it deliberately, and he thought about it every single day. His father had worked overnight security at a parking garage on the near north side for 22 years. Security, Marcus had been told, explicitly and repeatedly, was a low-status job for people without other options. The uniform was a mark of servitude. The job was about keeping your head down and your record clean and staying invisible enough that no one ever had to think about you. Marcus Payne had taken that lesson and turned it inside out. The way he saw it, you could be the one in the uniform, or you could be the one who decided who wore it. You could be invisible, or you could be the man that visible people called when they needed someone capable. He had chosen. He had built the firm from 2 employees to 17 in 9 years. He had earned a reputation in the city as someone who did not make mistakes and did not employ people who made mistakes. And then, 8 years earlier, Marcus Payne had made a mistake. It was at a charity benefit at the Chicago Cultural Center, a fundraiser for a music education program that Keanu Reeves had agreed to attend and briefly speak at. Marcus had been hired to coordinate the security for the evening. He was 33, still building the firm, anxious in the way that people who have worked very hard to get somewhere are always anxious about the possibility of being seen as less than they are. He had been at the service entrance when a man in a gray hoodie and jeans tried to come in through the wrong door. Marcus had stopped him, had been firm, professional, and not especially warm about it. Because warmth, in his experience, got you taken advantage of. The man had been patient, had said, simply, that he thought this was the entrance he had been directed to, had shown no irritation, had thanked Marcus and gone around to the front. 20 minutes later, Marcus watched that man take the stage to 300 people rising to their feet. It was Keanu Reeves. Marcus Payne had turned away the keynote speaker at an event he was paid to run smoothly. The organizer had found out. Not the story itself. Keanu had not said anything to anyone. But the fact that someone had been turned away at the service entrance had surfaced. And Marcus had felt the conversation about it in the way you feel a change in air pressure. No one said anything directly. But he knew they knew, and he knew what they thought. He had not worked with that charity organization again. He told himself he had outgrown that kind of client. He told himself a lot of things, in the way that people do when the thing they are most afraid of is that someone they respect got a good look at them and found something insufficient. What he had never told himself was the truth, that he was still angry about it, years later. That the composure Keanu had shown, the patience, the lack of grievance, the quiet dignity of simply going around to the front door, had felt less like graciousness and more like a reminder. A reminder of something Marcus was not, and suspected he might never be. He had coached Derek well, because coaching Derek was the closest thing he had to controlling that memory. You represent the standard of the place. You do not apologize for the standard. You hold it. On the night in question, Derek had held it. He had looked at the man in the cargo jacket and the worn sneakers, and he had made an immediate, professional, entirely reasonable assessment. And he had put his hand out. The lobby at Callaway's is a quiet space, black stone floors, a single orchid on a narrow console table, low ambient light. It is designed to feel like a threshold, to communicate, without saying so, that the space beyond it is different from the street outside. Keanu had pushed through the revolving door at 7:43 in the evening. Derek had clocked him immediately. Cargo jacket, worn dark jeans, canvas sneakers with the sole coming loose. No reservation offered at the door. The reservation desk was 15 feet in, past the orchid, and the man had simply walked forward in the easy, unhurried way that people walk when they are comfortable and not thinking about how they look. Derek had stepped forward. "Good evening. I apologize. We're at capacity this evening. There are several excellent options nearby I'd be happy to recommend." Keanu had stopped, had looked at Derek with an expression that was not quite a smile, but that suggested one was not far away. His eyes went from Derek's face to the dining room visible past the hostess stand, where at least a dozen seats were clearly unoccupied. "At capacity," he said, not a challenge, just the phrase, held up for examination. "Our capacity is a little different from our seating number," Derek said. He had been trained on this line. It was smooth, and it was true, and it communicated pleasantly that the decision was final. "Okay," Keanu said. "Just that." He looked at Derek for another moment. Not angrily, not with recognition playing on his face, not with the air of someone about to announce who they were. He just looked, the way someone looks when they are deciding whether the person in front of them has said something they actually believe or something they have been told to say. "Is the manager available?" he asked. "I can pass along any feedback you have." "Sure," Keanu said. "Tell them that the man who owns this place tried to have dinner here and couldn't get in." Derek blinked. He kept his face very still, because he had been trained to keep his face very still. But something shifted behind it, something small and fast, like a card turned over in the wrong direction. "I apologize," he said. "I didn't recognize. That's all right," Keanu said. "You didn't need to." He said it without any heat, without any weight. He was already turning toward the door, pulling out his phone. "You were doing your job," he said. "You did it the way someone told you to do it. That's not on you." He pushed through the revolving door and was outside. Derek stood at his post. His hands were still clasped behind his back, exactly as he'd been trained to hold them, and something in his chest was doing something that training had not specifically addressed. Outside, Keanu sat on the planter. He made his call. 90 seconds, maybe less. Then he put his phone in his pocket and watched the lake, which was doing what Lake Michigan does on a September evening, turning colors slowly, pewter to slate to something almost green. And he appeared to be in no particular hurry about anything. Inside, at the hostess stand, a 27-year-old named Renata Chen was trying to decide what to do with the information she had just heard. Renata had been at Callaway's for 2 years. She had been briefed when she started. A regular came in a few times a year. No reservation, table by the northeast window. Do not make a fuss. She had his name on a laminated card in the drawer beneath the reservation book, along with 4 others. She had never met him. She had assumed, because nobody had said otherwise, that the information had been passed to Derek as well. She looked at the dining room. She looked at the lobby. She looked at the drawer. She picked up the phone on the hostess stand and called the number she had been told to call if something went wrong during service. It rang twice. Then she went to find Derek. She was still explaining, quietly, quickly, when the Blacktown car pulled up outside. The man who got out wore a dark blazer over a white shirt, no tie, and moved with the economical precision of someone who had been called away from something and was not going to make a performance of it. He was 54 years old, 6 feet even, and his name was Joseph Calloway. He had founded the restaurant 18 years ago and run it with an exactness that had become, over time, its identity. He had also, 8 months ago, sold a minority stake in the property to a holding company whose most public-facing investor was Keanu Reeves. He knew the standing instructions. He saw Keanu on the planter. He went to him first. They spoke for 3 minutes. Keanu still seated, Calloway standing, and whatever they said was said without visible drama. Calloway's expression was controlled and careful. Keanu's was the same as it had been in the lobby, attentive, without heat, slightly amused in the way that a person is amused when life has done something interesting that they were not expecting. Then, they came inside together. Derek was still at his post. He watched them walk in and felt, with a precision that was almost physical, the specific sensation of understanding something too late to do anything about. "Derek," Calloway said, "will you come to the bar for a moment?" It was not a question. And it was not the bar. It was the narrow hallway beside the bar that led to the office. Renata caught Derek's eye as he walked past. She was not triumphant about it. She looked, if anything, the way you look when you are relieved something has been caught before it became worse, and frightened that it still might. The conversation in the office lasted 9 minutes. Calloway ran it. He did not raise his voice. He was precise about what had happened. Precise about what the instructions had been and why they existed, and precise about what he expected to happen differently. He was not cruel. He was thorough, which, in certain contexts, is harder to sit through than cruelty. Derek listened. Said almost nothing. His hands, which were not clasped behind his back now, were still. Then Calloway opened the office door, and they came back out. The dining room had gone on without them. The sommelier moving between tables, the soft percussion of flatware, the lake still doing its thing beyond the windows. The 42 seats had filled while he was in the office. Keanu was at the northeast table, alone, reading the menu that did not explain anything. Calloway crossed the room to him. "I'd like to offer you whatever you'd like this evening," Calloway said, "without charge, and with my complete apology." Keanu looked up from the menu. "I'll pay for my dinner," he said. "I always pay for my dinner." He said it pleasantly, without emphasis, as though they were discussing something obvious. "But I'd appreciate it if you'd ask Derek to come over here for a moment." Calloway looked at him. "Of course." Derek came to the table the way you come to something you have already decided is going to be difficult. Chin level, back straight, hands at his sides. The posture of someone who has been trained to show nothing and is showing nothing. "Sit down," Keanu said. Derek sat. He expected a dressing down. He had been preparing one for himself since the office. "How long have you been doing this?" Keanu asked. 18 months. Your brother got you in?" Derek looked at him. "You know Marcus?" "I know of him." A pause. "He's good. He built something real." Something in Derek's face shifted slightly, in the way faces do when they are braced for one thing and receive another. "He's the one who trained you on the standard," Keanu said. It was not a question. "He's the one who told me the standard matters," Derek said. "He's right." Derek did not know what to do with that. He waited. "I'm not here to make this worse than it is," Keanu said. "You saw someone who didn't look like they belonged somewhere, and you made a call. You've probably made that call 100 times and been right. Tonight you were wrong. That happens." He picked up his water glass, set it back down. "What I'm interested in is the thing underneath the call. I don't understand. You said we're at capacity. You looked me in the eye and said that while a dozen seats were empty. You're smart enough to know that the reason you said it wasn't about capacity. He kept his voice level. Curious, not accusatory. Where did the real reason come from? Derek was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be honest. From knowing what this place is supposed to be, he said finally. From not wanting to let something in that didn't fit. What didn't fit? Derek looked at the table. You want the real answer. I always want the real answer. The jacket. The shoes. The way you walked in without calling ahead, without... He stopped. The way you walked in like you already owned the place. There was a beat. I do own the place, Keanu said. I know that now. Let me ask you something, Keanu said. If I weren't me, if I was just a regular person who walked in wearing that jacket, would you have turned that person away too? Derek opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That's the question that actually matters, Keanu said. Not whether you made a mistake about who I am. Whether you were comfortable making someone feel they didn't belong in a room that had plenty of room for them. He leaned back slightly in his chair, and his voice did not harden. It stayed exactly what it had been. Direct, even, without a performance attached. I have turned things away too. Things I was uncomfortable with. People I didn't understand. You do it because it's easier than sitting with the discomfort. He paused. It's always easier. Derek looked at him. There was a man who came in twice a month, Derek said, quietly, older guy. He'd nurse a coffee for 2 hours at the bar. First few times I didn't say anything. Then I started watching him, looking at him wrong, probably. He stopped coming. He was looking at the table. I don't know why I told you that. Because it's the real thing, Keanu said. That's the real thing underneath everything else. He did not say anything for a moment. The sommelier passed their table and did not stop. I'm not asking you to change the standard, Keanu said. The standard of this place is real. People come here because they know what to expect and they trust that it will hold. That's worth protecting. He looked at Derek directly. What I'm asking is whether the standard is actually what you think it is. Or whether it's become something else. Derek said nothing. What do you think Joseph Calloway's been doing for 18 years? Keanu said. He's been creating an experience where people feel safe enough to be exactly who they are. The linen, the no-description menu, the sommelier who remembers urology from 2 years ago, all of it is in service of that one thing, making somebody feel seen. He tilted his head slightly. That's not incompatible with high standards. It is the highest standard. The dining room hummed quietly around them. The older man, Keanu said. The one who came twice a month. Yes, what was his name? Derek looked up. I never asked. Keanu nodded, slowly, not as judgment, as acknowledgement. That's what I came back to tell you, he said. That's all. He picked up the menu again. The one without explanations. I'm going to have the duck, he said. Will you tell Renata I'm ready? Derek walked back through the dining room to the hostess stand. Renata watched him cross the room. She had not been pretending not to watch. His face was different from when he had walked in with Calloway, and different again from when he had walked to Keanu's table. The precision was still there, the bearing, the held-together quality that Marcus had coached into him over years. But something underneath it had moved. He stopped at her station. What was the older man's name? He said. The one who came twice a month. Coffee at the bar. Flannel shirts. Renata looked at him. Gerald, she said. Gerald Marsh. He used to be a music teacher, retired. Derek absorbed this. How do we reach him? He left a number in case a reservation ever opened up. She watched him. He stopped coming about 4 months ago. Find the number, Derek said. I'd like to call him. Renata looked at him for another moment. Then she opened the drawer beneath the reservation book. Behind them, at the northeast table, Keanu was watching the lake. The service continued. The sommelier brought wine Derek had not heard selected. The 42 seats held their people, and the copper light had long since faded from the windows, leaving the dining room with only its own warm light, which was in fact designed very carefully to make anyone sitting inside it feel that what they were experiencing was exactly what they deserved. At the end of the evening, Keanu paid his bill. Full price. He tipped generously, he always tipped generously, and he did it without ceremony, the way people do when they are not doing it to be seen doing it. He stood and buttoned the cargo jacket that had caused the entire evening's complication. He crossed to the hostess stand on his way out. Renata, he said. Yes? You did the right thing, making the call. Don't let anybody tell you it was overstepping. She pressed her lips together. Thank you, she said. He nodded, turned toward the lobby. Paused. Derek. Derek looked at him from across the room. Keanu said nothing else. He just looked at him for a moment, the same way he had looked at him outside, on the planter, when the whole evening was still a question. Then he pushed through the revolving door and was gone, the worn sneakers quiet on the stone floor, the left sole still coming loose at the toe. Nobody began the applause. Nobody needed to. But 3 people at separate tables had been watching, and they looked at each other in the way that people look at each other when they have witnessed something and want to confirm that what they witnessed was real. It was real. In the weeks after that evening, Derek Payne made one phone call. To Gerald Marsh, retired music teacher, age 67, who had been coming to the bar at Callaway's every other Thursday for 2.5 years before he had stopped. The call was brief and did not go entirely smoothly. Gerald was cautious. People in their late 60s who have been made to feel unwelcome in a place they loved tend to be cautious when that place calls to apologize. Because in their experience, the apology is often about the institution managing its own discomfort rather than reckoning with theirs. Derek told him that was fair. He also told him that his table at the bar was open if he ever wanted it. Gerald came back 2 weeks later. He ordered his coffee. He sat for 2 hours. Derek, on his way past, stopped and asked him what he had taught. Strings, Gerald said, junior high and high school. 33 years. Any good students? Gerald considered this. 1 or 2 who were extraordinary. The rest were just honest. He looked at his coffee. Honest effort is underrated. Derek thought about that for longer than he expected to. The conversation with Marcus was harder. Marcus listened to the whole story without interrupting, which was how Marcus listened to everything, patiently, precisely, gathering information before forming a position. When Derek finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You turned away Keanu Reeves, he said. I did. Another silence. You know what I did 8 years ago, Marcus said. You never told me the full version, Derek said. So Marcus told him. He had never told anyone the full version. Not because he was ashamed, he told himself he was not ashamed, but because telling it required sitting with the specific quality of the memory, and the specific quality of the memory was that Keanu Reeves had been, by every measure, perfectly gracious about it, and Marcus had spent 8 years deciding what that meant. When he finished, Derek said, he said the same thing to me, that it wasn't on me, that I was doing what I was trained to do. Marcus looked at his hands. That's the part I keep coming back to, he said finally. That it wasn't on me. Because it was. I made a judgment. I made it fast, and I made it without enough information, and I made it because something about him didn't match what I was expecting. He looked at his brother. I've been training you to match a standard that I built partly out of that mistake, and I never told you what the mistake actually was. Derek said nothing. The standard is real, Marcus said. You still hold it. He was quiet for a moment, but you hold it for what it's actually supposed to be for. Neither of them said anything after that. They didn't need to. At Callaway's, over the following months, two things changed. The first was small. A standing instruction was added to the front of house briefing, and it was simple. If you are ever uncertain whether someone belongs here, ask yourself whether Joseph Callaway would want them to leave, feeling that they didn't. The answer, in 18 years of this restaurant's existence, had never once been yes. The second change was Derek's own. He started asking names, not performing it, not the sommelier's careful file-keeping, which was its own thing and belonged to its own skill set. Just learning the name of the person at the bar who came every other Thursday. Learning the name of the server's grandmother who came for her birthday every March. Learning, in a way he had never thought to before, who was actually in the room. Gerald Marsh, it turned out, had performed with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra as a young man. Second violin, one season, before life had taken him in the direction of a junior high school in Rogers Park, where he had spent 33 years teaching honest effort to children who mostly grew up to be accountants and nurses, and one, memorably, a first-chair cellist with an orchestra in Vienna. He told Derek about the cellist one Thursday in November. Derek stood at the bar for 11 minutes listening to it. His supervisor noticed and said nothing, because something about the way Derek was standing, no longer the chin elevated, hands clasped bearing of someone managing a room, had stopped being a thing that needed correcting. He was just a person listening to another person tell him something true. In a profile published in a Chicago magazine the following spring, Joseph Callaway was asked what made Callaway's different from the restaurants that had opened and closed on South Michigan in the same 18 years. He said, "We have always known who we are. We have not always known who everyone else was." He paused. "We are getting better at that." The journalist asked what had changed. Callaway smiled. Someone reminded us what the standard was actually for. Renata Chen left Callaway's 14 months after that September evening. She went back to school, hospitality management, with a focus on accessibility and inclusive service design. She had been thinking about it before that night, she said later, but something about the evening had made it feel urgent in a way it hadn't before. Urgent in the way that things feel when you have watched someone be shown something important and you realize you have been thinking about the same thing, just in a different language. She is still in school. She does not know yet where it will take her. She suspects somewhere good. I have been thinking about the moment Derek held his hand out. Not the mistake. I understand the mistake. The mistake makes sense. You see someone, you make a fast read, you act on the read. That is not a character flaw. That is how attention works, especially when you are young and you have been trained hard on a standard and you believe the standard is the point. What I keep thinking about is the moment after. The moment Keanu thanked him, not sarcastically, not with the weight of someone making a point, just thanked him, the way you thank someone who has done the job they were told to do and cannot be blamed for it. Then said he understood. Then said it wasn't on him. And Derek, by his own account, did not know what to do with that. I think about that a lot. The experience of being met with grace at the exact moment you were expecting consequence. The way that can be, in some ways, harder to receive than the consequence would have been. because the consequence would have let you close the thing. Put a frame around it. The grace keeps it open. It keeps asking you to look at it. Marcus Payne spent 8 years looking at it. He built something real in those 8 years. The firm is real. The standard is real. The discipline he brought to both is genuinely admirable. But somewhere underneath all of that, a man in a gray hoodie was still going around to the front door, and Marcus was still deciding what it meant that he had handled it the way he had. I do not know what I would have done in Keanu's position. I would like to think I would have been that gracious. But I am honestly not sure. Most of us are not sure. Because grace, the real kind, is not a performance. It is a habit that you build slowly, across years and small moments and decisions that nobody is watching. And that is the part you cannot shortcut. Maybe that is the point. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves's well-known reputation for genuine humility and consistent, quiet generosity toward people who are simply doing their jobs. If something in it stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what you took from it. Not what you think you were supposed to take. What actually landed. If you know someone who could use this today, not because they need a lesson, but because they're carrying something and this might help, share it with them. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. We're working on something I think you'll find worth your time. See you in the next one.